War doesn't always begin with a battlefield. Sometimes it begins with a jar. A single glass container holding something so bizarre, so grotesque, that entire nations are willing to spill blood over it. In 1731, a man walked into the British House of Commons carrying one such jar. Inside was a human ear, shriveled, leathery, and preserved in alcohol. He held it up like a trophy, demanding vengeance.
And the politicians listened.
That ear would be the spark that ignited a war. But the thing is, wars don't just happen because of one ear. That's the headline. The truth is always more complicated, darker, and usually boiling long before anyone notices. And this war, it tells you something fascinating about the 18th century, about how the oceans were controlled, about how empires treated trade like a blood sport, and about how much one empire feared losing its grip on the world. The story begins decades earlier. British merchants in the early 1700s had a problem. Spain controlled huge chunks of the Americas, and their colonies were swimming in wealth: gold, silver, sugar. Britain wanted a slice of that, but Spain wasn't interested in sharing. So Britain struck a deal. In 1713, as part of the Treaty of Utrecht, they gained a contract called the Asiento, giving them the exclusive right to supply enslaved Africans to Spanish colonies. And because Britain never missed a chance to push the limits, they also began smuggling other goods into Spanish ports: cloth, manufactured goods, even weapons. Spain hated it. Their colonial economy was designed to funnel everything back to Madrid, not let foreign merchants skim profits on the side. So they started sending out patrols called guardacostas, coast guards in name, but more like legalized pirates. These men would stop British ships, board them, and confiscate whatever contraband they found. At least, that was the theory. In reality, the guardacostas got greedy. They didn't just seize contraband, they looted entire cargoes. They even tortured crews for information. And for British merchants already operating in dangerous waters, this was gasoline on a fire. Which brings us to Robert Jenkins. Jenkins was a Welsh merchant captain whose ship, the Rebecca, was intercepted by a Spanish patrol in April 1731. The Spanish suspected smuggling, boarded the ship, and searched it from top to bottom. Accounts differ on what exactly they found. But one thing is clear: things got ugly fast. The Spanish captain, Juan de Leon Fandino, decided Jenkins needed an example made of him, so he took a knife and sliced off Jenkins's ear, and then he handed it back to him. "Take this to your king," he reportedly said. "Tell him if he were here, I'd serve him the same." Now, sailors in the 18th century were used to brutality, but mutilating a British subject and insulting the king, that crossed a line. Jenkins kept his ear, preserved it in a jar of brandy, and for 7 years he held onto it, waiting for his chance to show Britain what Spain had done. But here's the thing: for years, nobody cared. Britain's government was distracted with European politics and reluctant to go to war. Jenkins's severed ear was just another grievance in a long list of Spanish abuses. Until 1738. By then, tensions were boiling. British merchants were screaming about lost cargoes. Spanish patrols were becoming more aggressive, and in Parliament, politicians saw an opportunity. They invited Jenkins to testify. And when he walked into the chamber with that jar, the ear floating inside, the room erupted. Britain had found its rallying cry. But this wasn't just about an ear. It was about trade dominance. It was about the right to smuggle. It was about pride. And soon, it was about war. The War of Jenkins Ear officially began in 1739. Britain declared war on Spain, citing the mutilation of Jenkins as one of its justifications. But it wasn't just about Jenkins. It was about revenge, economics, and the growing tension between two aging empires, both trying to dominate the Atlantic. And this is where the story gets weirdly grandiose. Because the war started small. Naval raids, skirmishes, a few captured outposts. But then, it became a proving ground for something bigger: the 7 Years' War. The War of Jenkins Ear was basically the prequel to one of the first global wars in history. It wasn't a clean war. Most of the campaigns were disorganized. The British tried to invade Spanish Florida and failed spectacularly. They sent a massive fleet to attack Cartagena in modern-day Colombia and were utterly humiliated.
Over 18,000 troops were sent, and 90% of them died, mostly from disease.
And yet, the war dragged on. Back in Britain, the public was obsessed. Jenkins's ear became a symbol of national pride. Newspapers printed illustrations, political cartoons mocked Spain, and Parliament used it as justification for bigger imperial moves. Meanwhile, Spain used the conflict to double down on their anti-smuggling efforts. Ports were fortified. More guardacostas were dispatched. The Caribbean turned into a chessboard, with ships disappearing, alliances shifting, and every merchant ship becoming a potential spark for escalation. But there was something else happening, something that went beyond the war. This conflict was a glimpse into a future where empires wouldn't just fight over territory, they'd fight over trade networks, over who got to profit, over who controlled what people could buy, sell, and transport. The War of Jenkins Ear wasn't just about an ear, it was about control. And Robert Jenkins? After the war broke out, he basically vanished from history. Some say he returned to the sea. Others claim he lived out his days quietly. But in the grand scheme, it didn't matter. His ear had already done its job. It had become a symbol, a rallying point, a grotesque piece of Imperial theater. And maybe that's the weirdest part. Because this wasn't the first time a body part started a war. In ancient Greece, a war nearly erupted after an athlete bit off another's finger during a wrestling match. In medieval France, a noble insulted a king by turning his back on him, and it led to decades of conflict. Human history is full of moments where pride, honor, and perceived disrespect have turned into war. But rarely is it so literal. A single ear, floating in a jar, carried across oceans, held aloft in a government chamber, and used to justify the deaths of thousands. Not because of what it was, but because of what it meant. The next time someone says, "Don't lose your head over it," just remember, we started a war over an ear.